Today, we discuss Miro. Listen, when it comes to running client workshops, the dream, of course, is to get those creative juices flowing, right? But typically what ends up happening is thousands of hours get wasted because of poorly facilitated meetings. So I have Maya with me today. She's a consultant who runs Fortune 100 workshops, from leadership training to team building, and she has the insider tip on what makes things work. Maya?
Thank you, Jason. I've been doing this a long time. My number one tip is to bring everyone into that visual collaboration platform. So personally, I use Miro, and it's completely changed how I interact with the room. You have to give people a way to feel like they're in the room even when they're not. That's something you can do easily in Miro. Otherwise, they've seen the same slides and format 1,000 times.
Falling asleep, eyes glazing over, yawns, all that.
Exactly. When people follow me on the Miro board, everyone is literally going on a journey with me. We're adding thoughts, we're reacting, and we're voting for the best ideas. It's great.
Connective magic. I like it. That's Miro.com.
If you're interested in David Tennant and listening to his voice, you can watch the new episodes of DuckTales, the new series.
Oh, really?
Because he voices Scrooge McDuck.
Really?
Of all characters.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's Scottish, right? So it makes sense. Is he recognizable as David Tennant, or
not to me? Granted, I have not watched Doctor Who, especially with him in it.
Oh, he speaks with an English accent. Speaks with an English accent in Doctor Who.
So the only sort of voice that I can remember is him as
Jessica Jones.
Yeah, I cannot remember his character's name. What was his character? I'm watching The Defenders, and they mentioned him.
I watched one. I just kind of sort of watched one episode out of the corner of my eye the other day, but I haven't seen all the other stuff like Luke Cage and The Fist or whatever the hell the guy. Do you think it's important to watch those before you watch Defenders?
Kilgrave is a character, because I just looked it up. Right. For Defenders, I think it works better if you have seen all of them.
Oh, I haven't seen Daredevil either, right?
Okay, well, neither have I.
Yeah.
So that was definitely an area. But I know enough about the Daredevil character from the comic books that I could sort of piece together anything that's missing.
Everything I know about Daredevil I learned from Ben Affleck.
Probably not good enough, yeah. So it might help to see Daredevil there. I think I was less familiar with Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. I saw both of those series. Didn't see Iron Fist, and it seems like it kind of leans a little bit heavier on Iron Fist.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So
it starts with him, right?
At least where it starts out from. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably worth seeing all of them.
Yeah. If you have a chance, watch Broadchurch. I think they've done 3 seasons now of Broadchurch, which is David Tennant speaking in his native tongue of Scottish. It's a British whodunit mystery sort of thing, right? Where he plays a struggling police lieutenant or commander kind of guy. Very good. Have you guys seen Luther with Idris Elba?
I never have.
Yeah, see,
I've seen it on Netflix on the cards all the time.
Yeah. You guys have seen. You probably know Idris Elba from The Wire, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's funny because I saw him first in Luther. I just sort of stumbled across it one day, and I like British TV shows, so I watched that one. And that's a really good series too.
I was shocked when I first heard Idris Elba speak with a British accent.
Oh, really?
He's so good in The Wire.
Yeah.
I mean, he just speaks with a perfect American accent.
Yeah, for sure. You know, a lot of the vocal coaches that teach actors how to speak with American accents are actually Canadian.
Is that right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're all sneaking across the border. You have to learn how to be fit in as spies. That makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when they teach them an American accent, what do they teach them? Like a Midwestern sort of accent?
I guess it depends on the role, but I mean, because every I mean, I hear it a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I can tell a New York, New Jersey accent from a California accent from a Texas accent. There's a show that,
of course,
there's a show that not the exaggerated sense, I mean, but there's a show that Tammy's had me watching called The Ranch, which is Ashton Kutcher and Sam Elliott and Danny Matheson he's from the 70s show. And it's about the two of them play brothers, and Sam Elliott's their father. And have I got that right? Yeah, Sam Elliott, yeah. But they're in Colorado, and apparently I read a sort of show note somewhere that the accent they're using on the show is actually wrong for Colorado. Yeah, because because I think, Colorado, based on, say people I know down there, their accents are not very strong, right? Like,
Yeah, I always think of Colorado as being kind of a neutral accent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and there are cultural differences too, like, like the really heavy Boston accent versus the, like, you don't sound like you have a huge accent, Mark, Do
I sound like I have any Boston accent?
Occasionally, but not often, right? And then same with Jaime. You sound like just a regular American. I wouldn't have said that you came from El Paso or whatever. But I think you sort of said El Paso's on the California side, right?
Well, I mean, if you split the country in two, yes, it's on the California half.
Yeah. You mean the state?
But
it's definitely closer. Yeah.
So I used to have a pretty strong Boston accent, and now when I go back, people say I have a California accent.
Yeah, but how old were you when you moved out? You were you were late 20s, right?
I was 22, I think.
Oh, when you moved out to
maybe 21.
When you moved out that way, really?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's some adaptability there, because that should have been fully baked into your speech pattern at that point.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I actually lost it in college, interestingly enough, because I went to college in Boston, grew up outside of Boston, went to college in Boston, or really Cambridge, and somehow lost my accent while I was in Boston. Somehow. Yeah, probably because everyone around me was from other places.
Right.
There weren't too many of us locals around.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, okay, I guess we're out of stuff to talk about, right?
Run out, except for here. I'm like, oh man, I was looking, I was like, where's Boston at? I was like, in baseball. Looks like they're leading first place. Yep. And the Yankees are a game back.
Oh, no. It's like 5.5 games back, I think, something like that.
Oh, sorry. This one is showing the
Yankees were gaining ground, but the Sox have just won 3 games in a row, and the Yankees lost 3 games in a row, so they just gained 3 games back. So now as of today, it's 5.5.
Yeah, the view I was seeing is specific to the wild card, so it was very confusing. Just watching my Mariners, who were in it for a while and now are drifting further and further back at 4 back on the wild card.
Yeah, it's a pretty close race there. That's a lot. 4.5 is a lot of games in that crowd.
So when is baseball season over?
There's roughly 30 games left, plus or minus.
That's quite a few, right? It's like a third.
No, it's 162 games in the season.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, so it's almost over. So usually the end of September is the end of the regular season, and the term October baseball means the playoffs.
Oh, okay. So it's all settled in October, pretty much?
It's all, World Series is done by middle of October usually.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. This year has sort of whipped by a bit. Yeah. And summer has anyway.
Yeah, coming into September already.
The Blue Jays, I hate to say it, Tim, have been a pretty big disappointment this year for you Toronto fans.
Yeah, I haven't met it. Well, I see lots of people. I work down near the Rogers Stadium, which is now Rogers is still called Rogers. So I see them all the time, right? People wandering around.
Their record right now is 61-72,
which means nothing to me. So they're less than 500.
Less than 500, yeah. And they're 8.5 games out of the wild card, which is pretty tough to overcome. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams ahead of them in the wild card, and only the top 2 get in.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Not too much concern here. So they're renaming our ACC, which is where the Air Canada Centre, where the Maple Leafs play. Apparently, Scotiabank has thrown a whole lot of money at it. It's going to be called the Scotiabank Place or something like that now, right? So the SBP or something. I don't know. Makes no sense.
It gets rather confusing. I don't even know what the name of the stadium is for the Denver Broncos, because it used to be Invesco Field and then they got bought out.
Wasn't it Mile High Stadium, or is that the baseball stadium?
So it is at Mile High, but it had like a branded name first, like Invesco or something.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if we can find this. Sports Authority Field at Mile High. That's fantastic. Sports Authority is in bankruptcy, aren't they?
I don't know.
Sports Authority Field at Mile High, previously known as Invesco Field at Mile High, and commonly known as Mile High or Mile High Stadium. Yeah, these corporate sponsorships change like way too often. It gets very confusing.
Yeah, it does.
So when are you speaking in Austin or Jaime?
That would be, let me get this, September 30th.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Yeah, let me get the link here.
Is it a big conference or a little one? Or
little? It's a one-day unconference style, but it's got talks going into it, so there'll be probably 2 tracks like it was last time. And
there you are in the top row of the speakers.
There's 11 speakers, so it's probably 3-ish hours of workshop, like directly time, and then there'll be some time for people to just sort of hack on stuff and demonstrate at the end of the day what they put together. I've got a half-hour slot. It's so weird that if you click on my face, it doesn't actually show my session, but you can see the abstract that I put. Abstract writing, now that I reread that, does make it seem like I'm writing abstractly rather than writing abstracts. Now I see why Greg was confused.
Oh, abstract. Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who cares? Oh.
A lot of IBM people on the docket this time.
Carl Brown's working for IBM now.
Not surprisingly, because there's such a huge IBM site in Dallas, right?
Mm-hmm. And this is at Amazon's site in Austin, but IBM definitely has a presence there. And I think when they were here in February, there were a lot of Amazonian folks. So I'm guessing if there's a part 3, they'll probably have Tim Burks run that one over in, I don't know, Mountain View, possibly, San Francisco, potentially.
Yeah, he seems to be more focused on the city these days.
Mm-hmm. And then I wouldn't be surprised if it was very Google heavily.
So David Oakman is the guy I met at RWDevCon. I think he's a fan of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I met him at a meetup around here too.
Yeah, and then Carl Brown, I've met him a few times at playing Cards Against Humanity at 360 IDev. I don't know if you've met him before, Jaime.
I've played Cards Against Humanity with him, and that was about the only interaction I had, so I've not had a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, he looks familiar, actually. I think I've met him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody from, let's see, so non-IBM would be Tim Burks from Google, Luis De La Rosa from Capital One, David Hartman, Silver Logic, guy from Vapor, Udacity, Cuesta College, and others folks from IBM. So it'll be a mix.
So did you say IBM or Austin's a big IBM town, Mark?
I thought it was Dallas, but it might be Austin.
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that this serverless Swift one is going to be, I hope hers goes before mine, because I will be using the IBM Cloud Functions that's built on Apache OpenWhisk, because it should hypothetically be pretty easy to run a Swift function that all we really needed to do is accept a image and then turn around and call IBM Watson's visual recognition API and say, yo, give me the JSON for this, parse that JSON, and then determine whether this person is a celebrity or not, which is part of the JSON payload that you get back.
So what constitutes a celebrity?
That's a good question. And I think that's part of the fun, right? Like when I was tinkering with the visual recognition APIs for at least Watson, I can't remember if I was able to get it working off the demo for Amazon Recognition, which is the other competitor one, at least that I was looking at. I know Amazon uses IMDb. I'm not sure off the top of my head what Watson uses, but as an example, a YouTube star, quote unquote star, like Philip DeFranco, did not qualify as a celebrity for Watson. And I can't remember if he did for Amazon.
Really? I would think it was whether their TD or Twitter account has been authenticated or not would make them
verified or not. So I might start it off fun and be like, okay, well, let's put my face. Oh, well, I guess I'm not a celebrity despite hosting a podcast, of which there are dozens of us that listen. Yeah. And then choose, somebody well known. Probably not. I think the challenge would be finding a couple folks that will be relatively diverse. So man, woman, some sort of racial diversity would be good as well, but that are relatively recognizable and not politicized in any way, or at least non-obvious ways.
I think you should base it on how much they look like a hot dog or not a hot dog.
You should have a picture of the Paris Hilton and Paris Hilton.
One is a celebrity, the other is not, even though it's a well-known place.
Yeah. Which one's more famous? Or which parents had a better sense of humor? Yeah. All right. Well, on that happy note,
we'll
say adieu until next time.
All right. See you.
Okay.
Bonsoir.
Bye.
Bye.
And the fact that, we won't have to worry about him starting and stopping the recording. I mean, like from a guest point of view, it's pretty straightforward, right? I send you a link, you open it, and presto change we're on the show, right?
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. If this had some sort of ability to do live broadcasting as well in some future, that would be pretty cool too.
Well, that's a good point. Here's the thing. I saw a tweet by a fellow podcaster. What is his name here? The podcast or the gentleman his handle on Twitter is not there yet. And I think his podcast is not there yet. But he did a piece on why he thought Apple was getting into podcasting, right? Because we talked about this at WWDC when they had the podcasting studio. And I talked to somebody at Apple, my friend who works for Apple Canada was telling me that the podcast studio was booked solid, right? And it was like, each person had like an hour to get in there and get their thing done. And it was very, very popular popular venue, right, to do podcasting. So the theory is that, Apple's getting more involved in like I've always complained that podcasting is kind of a black box with Apple because it sort of grew as a grassroots sort of thing out of the iPod itself, right? And I guess they just must have made this way of, doing these sort of, what do you call it, cable access TV show kind of, record your own podcast, grow your own podcast kind of thing. And one of the promises that they added in just before WWDC is the fact that we can now register our podcast with them and create like an account for it, like we do with an app, right? So when I log into my iTunes account, I don't just see my apps, I also see the podcasts, and eventually there's going to be some analytics being thrown in there. I think we talked about that, or they talked about that at WWDC, right? So it sounds like they may be, taking podcasting a little bit more seriously, right? And it's, podcasting is growing leaps and bounds, right? I'm seeing more and more tech podcasts, they come and they go, but, a lot of Swift podcasts. And I think people who are the sort of what I consider the pundits of the industry are getting into podcasting quite a bit, right? Beyond, Daniel Jalkut and Menton Reese and Joe Saplinski and Charles Perry, and of course, the Accidental Talk Tech podcast folks. There's quite a few. What's the one that your buddy from Texas is in? I think somebody closed the door. What was his name?
David Oken? Was that who you're?
No, it's the guy from Texas. He had a big tattoo of Texas on his forearm or his bicep.
Yes.
They do.
I see his face. Oh my God! What he worked on the Swift Argo, the JSON parsing thing. What's his name?
Yeah, I know. I'm totally drawing a blank on him. Anyway, he has a podcast he does with somebody else. So it's like build environment or run. It's not like run loop. It's like it has something to do with building apps, right, or running builds,
right?
I think maybe if I go to iTunes, I can see it again. But anyway, there's him, and then there's more and more people getting into podcasting, and of course, on the radio side, Strombo has his own radio show, but some of the people that he works with are starting to do podcasts as well. Like there's a gentleman named Bob Makowitz who's been a long time in radio, but he's more sports radio. So he's got a sports podcast now that they started up a couple of months ago. And I mean, when a celebrity gets into podcasting, one that sort of says that's good for podcasting, but it also makes it more challenging for the rest of us to sort of grab audience attention, right? So, and all of our CBC TV show or CBC radio shows, because I think radio is kind of suffering the same thing that newspaper and magazines did for a while, where as everything got digital and, we have this whole YouTube culture, radio, like live broadcast radio is kind of becoming a thing of the past. People aren't sitting down and listening to the radio when the show's on. So rather than do that, they, a lot of these shows are taped and then they publish the show as a podcast. So, there's one podcast I listen to, which is normally on at 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, and I'm hip deep in editing a podcast. But like on Thursday night, they publish the podcast, so I can listen to it ahead of time, or I can listen to it anytime during the week, right, kind of thing, right? And there's another sort of tech podcast called Spark, which I listen to as well. And that's normally published on Sunday live, but it's a podcast as well. So a lot of our CBC radio shows are now becoming podcasts, and you can, they advertise during the show that you can either listen to it on Sirius Radio, or you can listen on CBC Radio across the country, or download the podcast kind of thing, right? So there's even a podcast show on CBC where they review podcasts. So, and
it's starting to get a little meta there.
Yeah, well,
when you start having stuff that reviews its own, and I get what you're saying. Like NPR puts just about every one of their radio broadcasts on it. Like I listen to looks like Planet Money is great. I have no clue when that show comes out, like live. So I don't need to know. I don't care, right? Like the beautiful thing about podcasting as opposed to radio is that it's time shift and I can listen when I'm available, right? Like maybe I'm not available at I don't know, Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Like, oh, okay. I can listen to this when I'm walking my dog or mowing the lawn or doing whatever. Yep. So, and I think we've found that a lot of our fans do the same thing too, right? I mean, we could hypothetically do, live streaming, and I'm sure there would be be a number of folks who do that, but I mean, that's not something that everybody can do, and that's not something that everybody wants to do. And even just time zone stuff, right? We have fans in Russia and Brazil and all these other places that aren't exactly, good times to, sit and listen, right? Like even when we record, it's like, okay, well, let's find something that's not too difficult for the East and West Coast, much less, oh, guess what? It's like 3 a.m. when the podcast starts over in like Zimbabwe or something, right? Like that's brutal. It's much better for some folks to just, listen when they have the time and availability.
So here's something we haven't talked about this on the show before, but since we're in the after show, we'll probably get on the show. But so you know how you can search in iTunes for iOS development, and More Than Just Code comes up like number 1 worldwide and has for like the last year and a half, right? Mm-hmm. You know that, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm telling people there who don't know about it. I just searched for Swift development, and guess what?
What?
We come up 3rd.
We come up 3rd. That's actually not too bad because there are podcasts with Swift in their name.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see here. Where this is so bad. I don't use the Apple Podcast app. I use
I'm using iTunes. I'm using iTunes itself, like the iTunes app on my Mac.
All right, let me try this. Swift. Yeah. Oh, this is an interesting list. So yes, we do come out 3rd, but number 1 for me when I see here is iOS Dev Break with Evan K. Stone.
Right. Yep.
Let It Out with Katie Dalebout, a holistic health lover, apparently.
Oh, okay.
And then More Than Just Code is 3rd there.
Right. But in the list of episodes, we have 4 shows listed there. That's great. But again, I don't know how people actually search for stuff. And actually, I can't remember who I was talking to about the. I think I was talking to you guys about the statistics. And oh no, it was on that podcast I was talking about. It was a rather interesting little piece, and I retweeted it because I thought it was, if people are into podcasting, and a few people are, they would be interested in this piece, because he also uses it's his NTY essays is the account. Yeah, not there yet. Oh, NTY, duh. Mm-hmm. But he's got this little podcast where he does a blog, and then I think he uses Fireside, and it's a short blog, and then to listen to the rest of the blog, you click on it and you listen to his podcast, right? And it's just a short thing. It's like, I think it's maybe 12 minutes. And one of the things he was talking about was the metrics of downloads. And I think we've talked about this before, is like, if I publish at noon on Saturday, by about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I can start to see, 300-400 episodes have been downloaded, right? And a lot of those are clients like Overcast and Podcast App, and, I don't know what the other catchers do, like Castro and that kind of stuff, but they download the shows in the background while, again, we're talking about backgrounding at the top of the show, right? Mm-hmm. But that isn't necessarily somebody actually watching or listening to the show. That's just their podcast or downloading it. But by the next day, we've got like 1,300, 1,400, up to 2,000, people have listened to the show over a week or 2, right? So, but he was saying that a lot of those early numbers are just the automation of apps or apps downloading, and people may have forgotten that they at one point clicked the subscribe thing in Overcast. Like, I don't know about you, but I only have about 5 or 6 shows that I'm actually subscribed to on Overcast. I don't, ours included and Tammy's, right? But
oh wow, that's actually quite different for me, Tim. I have a real-time follow-up. I'll count them and then I'll say no, but go ahead and continue, because I think that's actually quite interesting. That because like when you look at the stats, you kind of have to, beyond the pure downloads, right? Beyond pure numbers, right? Just like there's a seasonality to a lot of businesses. There is a life cycle for podcast downloads, is what I'm hearing.
Right. So what I have in my, I have like, I guess 6 podcasts that I'm subscribed to. Sorry, 7. So I have Mac Power Users, which I don't always listen to them. Then I've got the Macowitz show that I just talked about, Maco and Cause podcast, and I've only listened to a couple of episodes. I'm not a big sports guy, so I probably will unsubscribe from that at some point in the future. Taggart and Torrens, and then of course Under the Influence, which is the Terry O'Reilly show that I talked about. And then I have a bunch of shows in the backlog that I just, I have them here. I may listen to them from time to time. Like I've got Accidental Tech podcast, CocoConf, Core Intuition, More Than Just Code, Playgrounds podcast, because I think Greg was on that one. Podcast Method, which is Dan Benjamin's old podcast, right? Agile Betty, so I apologize, I haven't been listening to that one. Ray Wenderlake, which is in hiatus right now. Roundabout, Swift Coders. I just started listening to Swift Coders since I was on the show, and then a podcast called WTF by Mark Maron, who's a comedian, does interesting stuff. That's what I have in my podcast podcast app. What do you have in yours?
Tim, I counted them up. You don't want me to enumerate them like you just did. It is 47.
47. So do you listen to, how many podcasts do you listen to a week?
I have no idea, because the thing about these 47 subscriptions, I'd have to look through and see. Some of these haven't updated for a while, so I don't recall if they're on hiatus. Just like the Ray Renderlich one has a season to it that they go on a break for a while, and then they do, I don't know, 10-ish, 12-ish episodes probably in a row, maybe more. Some of these are for like TV shows that are on hiatus right now, like the Supergirl TV talk. Like that's not going to start up again until August, or it's not August, until the autumn when the show goes back on the CW again. Of course, there's big ones that you might expect, like the talk show with John Gruber. I mentioned Planet Money. Of course, we've got Roundabout and Orange Just Code, Release Notes, all sorts of random things like How Did This Get Made, which is a fun comedy one. A Star Trek one called The Greatest Generation, which is absolutely fantastic. They have...
Wait, so which is The Greatest Generation?
That is Star Trek. Star Trek The Next Generation is what they're covering, and they have gone... they're almost done. They're in the 7th season now. They have gone episode by episode, giving sort of recaps and great comedy takes on the various episodes. And apparently soon they'll be doing the same with Deep Space Nine. So it has got me wondering, it's like, wow, it would be kind of cool to do like a Star Trek Voyager one and maybe even a Star Trek Discovery one, because that show's about to start relatively soon.
Yeah. It's funny, I was watching Star Trek on Netflix. I just noticed it's on Netflix now. I used to watch that all the time when I was a kid, right? Because it was in reruns constantly. But you know what really bothers me about Star Trek as it is now? They've gone through and they've made them all high res, right? They've all rezzed them all up, and I guess because they were originally done on film. But they George Lucas the outdoor shots of they had all those models and those planets that they would orbit. And they were kind of like hokey, but they were believable somehow, because they weren't motion capture or whatever. They were actually really objects that were filmed in a studio. They've gone through and they've redone those. Even the title part, where the ship comes whipping by, really quickly. There was a naivete to those original kind of special effects that I really liked, and I don't like the fact that they've changed all those with new 3D effects. I talked about this on Roundabout a couple of weeks ago, but what do you think about that? Have you watched the new Star Trek at all? Or
I don't think I've seen. I haven't sat down and watched those.
I'm talking about Kirk and Spock and those guys.
Oh no, I've seen those, but what you're talking about is the special edition sort of style of updated graphics. I don't think I've seen episodes with the updated graphics. I'd have to check and see, but that's definitely the sort of thing. They came out with
a box set on DVD or Blu-ray a couple of 3 years ago, and now they're on Netflix, right? So I again, Greedo didn't shoot first, right?
Yeah, I mean that was like full on changing the story. In this case, it's they've not changed the story; they've changed the special effects, so they're hypothetically like not as embarrassing as they might have been to modern eyes. But I think for fans that remember the original look, I think it'd be nice if they offered both.
It would be. Yeah.
I'm reminded of what was it? It's like the 10-year anniversary edition of Microsoft's Xbox game called Halo, first-person shooter thing, where that 10th anniversary edition or whatever, or Legacy edition, whatever it's called, offered high-res graphics for modern PCs. They're just beasts compared to what an Xbox would have been back in the early 2000s.
Right. Yeah.
And it also had like a mode where you could switch it back to, this is the original graphics. And it was really cool how you could just literally press a button and live switch between them to see how did they change the character models, how did they change colors, how did they change patterns, that sort of thing. And not saying you would do that during an episode, but it sure would be nice if you had a Netflix option of like, which one do you want to see, the original version, or do you want to see the up-resed, greater use of CGI sort of version?
Yeah, I don't know. It's well, I mean, they've done the same thing on Turner Classic Movies. I've been watching a lot of movies like they had Hitchcock movies or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of it's sad that I guess my point is this: when I go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and I walk up to the Mademoiselle d'Avignon painting by Picasso, I don't want to see somebody who's gone in and touched it up. I want to see the actual piece of art that creator's hand created at the time, right? Mm-hmm. So warts and all, I want the original Star Trek that I remember when I was a kid, because I watched it 1,000 times and it bothers me every every time I watch that show, that every time they cut away to the transition pieces, which is showing the ship, orbiting the planet or what have you, just, no, I want my Star Trek.
Right. So let's break that down a little bit. So it sounds like there's some aspect of nostalgia that you want to see it as you remember it. But I also heard in there a little bit of like the artist, respecting the artist, the original artist. So how does that play into, you also mentioned Greedo. Well, that is the original artist and creator who specifically made that change. Like where do you fall on the spectrum for improvement?
Well, yeah, no, and I totally object to that change, because I actually have on DVD an original copy of Star Wars, the movie Star Wars. It's not called A New Hope. Doesn't say A New Hope on the crawler at the beginning, and it's the original warts and all print that I saw in 1977, right? And it's only on DVD, right? There's never been any Blu-ray copy of it or high-res enhanced or whatever. That's the actual physical movie I remember seeing, and that's because when I think it went to VHS, they added A New Hope, as if and there was some talk about whether there was intended to be 3 movies or whatever. He was thinking of doing 3 movies. But at the time, he had just done like American Graffiti and, that THX thing that he did. What was the other thing he did? George Lucas. He hadn't done very many movies, right? And even he didn't think Star Wars was going to be all that when he did it, right? But, so now there's this whole lore, and Disney owns them, and, there's all these books been written and this whole universe has been expanded. I'm sorry. Give me a break. The guy just wrote, got lucky with a film draft, which is like a Western, and written on the sort of the Joseph Campbell myth and legend kind of theory, right?
So how do you feel? So I definitely understand the artist thing, like your example of, somebody taking a Picasso painting and going in and touching it up some way. But what if it was Picasso himself, using that as an analogy for like what George Lucas has done with the Star Wars?
Well, see, here's the thing. Picasso was a true artist, right? He wouldn't have gone into a painting he did in 1913 in 1950 and touched it up again. He would have done a variation on that painting in 1950. He would have left the original one alone. In fact, at that point in time, he didn't even own it, so I guess it's kind of a moot point, right? But
okay, so like on the principle of the thing, you're definitely against artists going in and changing their art once it's been released to the world. Is that sort of the
I mean, like it's like I look at the whole movie industry and whole recorded music industry and television as in their purest form, they were expressions of creativity at the time with the best tools that were available, right? I mean, so if you want to go in and make a special version, now that we have the technology to do a better Star Wars movie, make another movie. Tell me a different story. Leave the original one alone, right? Like I kind of equate the original Star Wars movie, like A New Hope as we call it now, to something like Scarlet Pimpernel or Robin Hood, or because it had that or even Flash Gordon. It had that kind of feel of being a Saturday morning serial movie, right? Like I used to actually go to see those serial movies when I was really a little kid, right? But have you ever seen the black and white Flash Gordons that are they used to sometimes show them and they were it was kind of like episode 4 and here they give you a recap of what's happened in the past, and so you can just get right into the story.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Right? That Star Wars has that feel very intentionally. That was a huge influence, Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon type stuff.
Yeah, it was intended to be that, and it was, but it was just sort of like hey, we discovered this film canister in the back of this cinema, and let's put it on and watch it, and that's kind of sort of where Star Wars starts, right? And it's an homage to all those kind of serial movies, right? And it's got that sort of crude, and it wasn't intentional. It's got that sort of crude style to it. Like the acting is kind of like Luke Skywalker or Mark Hamill talking to Alex Guinness is a little wooden when he first here's the lightsaber your father intended you to have, right? And then there's all this sort of loose dialogue that these actors said at the time. I forget what was this famous quote. I think it's by Harrison Ford that says something about he said back to George Lucas, like it's all well and good for you to write this stuff, but have you ever tried saying it to somebody, because it's awful, right? I think the story too is like, so I went and saw Star Wars on Friday night. Movies used to come out on Thursday night back then, and they would stay in a theater for like 12 weeks if it was a good movie. They wouldn't move around from theater to theater, right? But so I went with my girlfriend on Friday, and then so I was so blown away by this movie. And I had a bunch of guys that I hung out with, at one of the guys' houses, and I spent all day Saturday trying to convince these guys to go see this movie, right? And then Sunday they capitulated. We went and saw the 7:00 showing at a different theater downtown, and I remember listening to C-3PO and R2-D2 talking to each other after they just landed on Tatooine, and they're talking, and he's like, "Go that way, you'll be lost in a moment." All that scene where they're sort of arguing, that sort of, and thinking, this is crap. Like, well, my friends are going to think I'm an idiot. Listen, because now that I've actually had, the 2 days to sort of, and go back and listen to the dialogue, I was like, oh my God, my friends are going to think I'm stupid. Thankfully, they blew up the Death Star every time. So it was like, people were like cheering and throwing popcorn in the air and whatever, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, that kind of diverges from what you're saying, but that's the kind of, to me, that's the sentiment of Star Wars. Don't mess with it. Just leave it alone. It's finished. I think I've told this story before, but my art teacher in high school used to say every artist needs somebody behind them with a sledgehammer. Hit the artist on the head when he's done.
Right. So right? Tim, how far does that go?
Well, I can tell you, as an artist, you're never satisfied with your work, and that's what drives us to create more works, right? Is that, you create one, like I look at paintings I did when I was 20, and I kind of go, yeah, I could have done that better, or there's a glaring mistake I made there. I hope nobody ever really notices it, or hope nobody gets out a protractor and measures the angles on this thing, and
right. So I know there's like an egregious level of things like Steven Spielberg going back into E.T. and saying, oh no, let's digitally erase those guns and put walkie-talkies there, and let's change the flavor of that scene. Okay, that's one sort of tinkering. What about remastering as an example? So, Star Wars in 1977 was, like the most basic of stereo, if that, and the audio was definitely not THX, right, whatever the standard is, quality now, and it's certainly not 4K quality if you were to put it on your 4K screen, and it wouldn't support surround sound if you've got a system like that. Like how far does that sort of thing go? Like sort of thinking
I can tell you that
like the Beatles stuff, like you probably wouldn't want to listen to that in mono, which is what it was mostly recorded in, or at least early stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of it was in stereo, but it does. It's funny because the Beatles stuff is a good example, because like the box set that came out a couple of years ago, I did buy that, but like I don't know if you've ever listened to some of the early 60s recordings. They used to put the band on one side and the singer on the other side. So if you turned off the left channel, all you hear is the singer.
Right.
Like all you hear is John Lennon or Paul McCartney. But if you turn off the other one, all you hear is like, the music. And then later on they got more sophisticated, and they would have like the bass on one side and the guitar on the other. And but very separated, not sort of like it is now where things are sort of in the mid, like they pan them back and forth and they're sort of in the middle. They would definitely put them on one speaker or the other, right? So if you ever listen to a Beatle recording from that time and you have a dead speaker, you're hearing different music than you've ever heard in your life, right?
Where do you follow that sort of thing, right? So I'm pushing the limits here and understanding the contention of like not changing the art.
What I was going to say. So like some of my favorite movies, if they're like, I saw Blade Runner. I went and saw Blade Runner a couple of years ago because it had come back out with a sort of director's cut, right? Again, director's cut, right? Mm-hmm. But he had gone back in and beefed up the music or whatever, and I saw that in the theater. And it was like one night only kind of thing. Yeah, I'll go to that, right? And I like Baby Driver by Edgar Wright. I went and saw that in the theater because that's where it's intended to be seen, in my opinion, right? When Edgar Wright came and had his little film festival and he showed Shaun of the Dead in a theater, I went and watched it in a theater because I had seen it there, right? And I remember when Star Wars came through, one of the redos of Star Wars where they were back in the theater again. I had never seen Revenge of the Sith.
It depends which one. Do you mean the originals, like when they came out in the 90s?
What's the actual third movie? The third movie. What's that one?
So do you mean Return of the Jedi?
What's the movie called? Where?
See, that's a very complicated question, Tim, because like I get what you what you mean. Like the third one used to be Return of the Jedi, but now there actually is an episode 3, so it's a little ambiguous.
Yeah, but actually the Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi used to actually be Revenge of the Jedi. That was his original name, right? Anyway, so Return of the Jedi, the one where Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader throws the Emperor down the tunnel, and Darth Vader dies at the end. That movie there, I had never seen it in the theaters just because of relationships and blah blah blah. Long story, but so when it came around, I actually went and saw it in the theater. And actually, I was living in Vancouver at the time when Episode 4 came out, and yes, I went and saw Episode 4 in the theater. Right? I've even gone to see The Phantom Menace in 3D in a theater. Jaime.
Yeah, that's quite good. Like I have seen the original trilogy, well, the special edition versions in the theater. I was 2 when Return of the Jedi came out, so I can't say for certain I didn't see it in the theater, but I probably didn't because I don't think my parents would have taken me at that age.
Right. Huh. Yeah, no, it's so yeah. Like I'm saying, my point is that movies like Star Wars, Shaun of the Dead, and Baby Driver and stuff like that are meant to be seen in that context in a theater, right? They're not meant to be seen on your 4K, Blu-ray, television with your surround sound and your comfy chairs at home. I mean, that's where to be honest with you, that's where most of us consume them now, or download it onto your iPhone 6 because the film projector doesn't work on the flight you're on, kind of thing, right? Okay, so here's an example, right? I did a painting, and it just happened to be the weekend that the Columbia Space Shuttle took off for the first time, like back in 80-something, right? 82, 83, whenever that was. 82, I think, right? I remember, and it was sort of a 3D geometry thing, and I thought, okay, this painting needs something to make it, that much better. And the something I added was the space shuttle, and kind of, flying off into the distance, right? And I was never happy with the painting. Like I was thought I could do it better, and so flash forward many years later, like 10 years later or whatever it was. I guess it would have been 90. I guess late 80s, right? And you'll know where I'm going with this because so I redid the painting and I did it much better rendering of it. It was more geometrically precise and all that kind of stuff, and better effects, and looks a much better painting, right? And I happened to be painting it the day the Columbia blew up, right? So I intentionally did not put the Columbia in that painting, right? But so even in my own work, when I want to redo my own work, I do another piece. I don't go back and paint over the original one.
So to recap, special editions, no. ET, no. Or not non-guns.
I don't mind special editions. I don't mind special editions, but don't take away my right to see the original piece of art in its original context, right? I mean, admittedly, I can't go to Paris in 1913 and see, Demoiselle d'Avignon the first time it was exhibited. That's not going to happen, right? Like, there's no such thing as a TARDIS. I can't jump in it and go back and see, what a flop it was when it was first introduced, because like Demoiselle d'Avignon, I'm using that one as a milestone because when it came out, it was like people thought, oh my God, what the hell is this, right? And now it hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, right? And we study it in art, and we talk about it. We talk about how the paint was put down and how the characters were drawn and all that kind of stuff, and what amazing painting it was, because like Star Wars, it took the level of art and craftsmanship to a new level, right? So if you remember, Star Wars was one of the first ones where ILM came in and did motion capture with actual models, right? Before that, like if you go back and watch Buck Rogers or go back and watch Flash Gordon, you see the spaceship flying along, in the sky, and the smoke is blowing up because,
they didn't have the compositing style of model work that ILM ended up doing for Star Wars.
And to me, in movie lore or movie history or whatever, Star Wars was another touch point or another milestone in movie making. Because, I mean, after that, everybody did motion capture. There was silent running. There was, the Star Trek first movie, what's it called?
The motion picture?
Star Trek, the movie, right? There was Blade Runner even used some of that stuff. And, they started using actual, what do you call it, live effects, where they use, practical effects, they call it, where they actually use physical cars. The flying car is actually a car that goes up and down on a rig, and with smoke coming out, it looks like it's floating, kind of thing in Blade Runner, right? As opposed to all being CGI. And then, you move through time, and then you get to like Avatar, where the whole, like Avatar, a lot of the movie is all CG rendered, which...
Yeah, so there, and if I catch the gist of where you're going with this, the nice thing of having those like practical effects was that they still hold up as being like feeling real a lot better than
realistic. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've seen some CGI. I was like, oh man, that looked really good at the time. Now it looks like garbage, right? The art has advanced so much that early CGI really sort of sticks out. Whereas, like if you compare the climactic scene in Aliens, right, where Ripley is in the construction robot power suit and she's facing off against the Queen alien, that looks hella good. It still feels really scary, right? Like that thing is really there, is like what your reptilian brain is thinking. Whereas I think if they were to redo that movie now, it wouldn't have that same aspect to it, because there would be something just a little bit off with the CGI today. And 10 years from now, that same CGI based movie would be like, oh man, that's so garbage. Like, look how fake that is, right? We got pixel shaders that do a much better job of handling this.
Well, that's a good example, like, because the Aliens movie with Ridley Scott, I think the second one was done by James Cameron when you're talking about Aliens, right? But the original Aliens movie by Ridley Scott, it was a guy in a suit, right? We all know that, right? But they never showed a full frame shot of the monster in that movie. In fact, there's a behind the scenes scene where you can sort of see the monster in profile, and you can totally see it. Oh, it's a guy in a suit, right? In fact, they even named the actor who plays the alien in all these movies, right? But the magic about the original Aliens movie was they never really showed you full on, like a full frame shot of the alien. Like it was just enough to scare the shit out of you, right? Oh, there goes our rating.
You can always edit it in post. But just bleep it.
That's true. But I mean, that was the beauty of that movie, of that Aliens movie. The other thing about Aliens that was really interesting, and I don't know if you know this or not, or even realize this or not, but it was one of the first times when a female was the heroine of a movie, especially a sci-fi movie, right?
Right. And although there is sort of like the weird like underwear sort of scene, and in retrospect it sits a little weird for like modern audiences, but really not sort of pressed forward as this is a sex symbol kind of character, right?
Yeah.
Which the modern Wonder Woman movie actually does a really good job of making her seem like an incredible like warrior first, and not so much a like, hey, look at me, I'm a supermodel. She's still a really attractive woman though, right? Like there's still some compromise there, as opposed to Sigourney Weaver's character of Lieutenant Ripley, who is like, this is a normal everyday person who has overcome the odds, right? This isn't like, oh, let's throw it in there with Megan Fox or something to get all the tickets from the fans. Like Sigourney Weaver was not as known then, certainly for Aliens, much more so because of the Alien movie, but not in that lead starring role for Alien for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and then I mentioned it before, like Phantom Menace. I think I've talked about it on the Roundabout, and maybe this show too. Like I remember specifically that Jar Jar Binks was Jar Jar Binks and his whole Gungan society was completely CGI, right? And that was the first time that many scenes in a movie were done in CGI, right? And I don't know if you remember, like you talked about a movie that was amazing at the time, but like in retrospect, crap. And to be honest with you, I was looking at it with adult eyes. Do you remember there was a movie called Final Fantasy?
Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within.
Yeah, CGI. Yeah, and Patrick Stewart was one of the voices in it and stuff like that. Go back and watch that movie. Their foreheads don't move, like because the technology to do that wasn't there, right? But I was watching Arrival the other day on Netflix. Now that it's on Netflix, great movie by the way. If you haven't seen Arrival, stop the podcast, go watch Arrival, and come back, and you won't regret it. But there's a scene there where she goes into the alien ship, like into their environment, and all of a sudden, and it's a great mix of practical like filming of her, and all her hair is done in CGI, and it just shows you how far we've come in terms of CGI rendering abilities, that they're able to make her hair look spacey but realistic, like believable, right? But I mean, again, that Final Fantasy Spirits Within, that again was another milestone in movie making, right? Because it was one of the first movies where they had actors, that wasn't like hand drawn animation, voicing, these computer rendered people. And again, like, you're a gamer, right? You know that the cutscenes that you see in games. I don't know how evolved they've come, but back in the PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 days, you'd have, or even on the Mac, when you're playing like things like Warcraft, or not the current Warcraft, but the early Warcraft 3 or whatever. You would have like those really rinky-dink sprites that you were using for playing the game, but occasionally they would cut to this battle scene where this denouement would happen. Even in Lara Croft, they did the same thing. But now computer rendering, or the devices we're playing these games on, like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox, whatever the hell it's called,
the confusingly named Xbox One, which is the third in the series.
I was going to say one, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be yelled at because it was 360 before
and Xbox before that, which used to be informally called Xbox. The first Xbox One, and then they came with Xbox One, which was the third one, which is very terribly confusing.
Yeah. So almost like the way Apple used to name products, but So what I was saying is, like, I think now we're playing with characters that look like they were in those cutscenes from like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? Like, they're that well, like they can render the entire world and have the detail and all that kind of stuff, and have the fabric flowing, and characters can get wet and be dry and catch fire and things like that, and it looks visually realistic, right? That's because the art has evolved to make it that good. I mean, it's I don't know if you remember the talk that I gave at Indie Death Stock. I talked about how we started off with flat cave paintings, and then we went into the Egyptians, where everything was facing forward, and they just kind of they bent their elbows a little bit. And then as you moved forward into the Renaissance period, you had painters like Caravaggio, who could have a guy reaching out of the painting while he's gesturing as he's talking to Christ, like he's got his arms, his right arm is going out into the space where we're standing, and his left arm is way kind of back, and he's like got he's and the realistic shading, and it looks like a candlelit image of this guy talking to Christ, right? And as art, the technique of art evolved to the point where gone from these really sort of plastic representational iconography to something that looks like a realistic man in space, right? Like in 3D space, right? And those were that kind of technique evolved, and that's why we study artists at certain points in time, because they came up with a technique, or they came up with a way of rendering or drawing or telling a story that made sense, right? And in the same sense that movies do that too, right? So that's what comes back to my point. Like don't mess with Demoiselle d'Avignon and leave Star Wars alone.
Right. And I think as an examination here of the, this tool set has become available and become more prevalent, computer generated imagery.
Yeah.
But the careful use of that tool, and not have it be, this is the tool that we use for everything, I think has been done pretty well in the last few years, as people have sort of figured it out. And we can use two movies from the same series, where the latter movie has way more special effect or CGI in it that a lot of people don't think about actually is CGI, because it's done so well and so sort of understated, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Comparing Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which just came out recently, there actually are more CGI instances in that, even though people are like, what? No, it all looked real. It's like, well, that's because a lot of it was, right? Like, the huge problem that Episode 1 suffered from is it said CGI for everything, which sort of limited the possibilities there, and meant that there was a lot of stuff being done. And when you see the behind the scenes, I'm like, dude, they're just in a conference room. Like, you couldn't have had a set designer come in and do this stuff. There's no, why would you waste time and money and effort on CGI for this, right? Like,
because they could.
Whereas now, for The Force Awakens, like, they just got some people and they sat in an actual conference room, and they used the CGI for things like, we want more explosion to come out of this thing.
Yeah, when the stormtroopers get knocked over, they actually knock over a stuntman,
and
right?
BB-8, that droid character, like, he actually
is real,
there,
right?
except for when he's not, right? Like, the handful of times that it would not have been practical to have the real robot puppet for some scenes. But for the most part, like, it's a nice, careful blend of, we use real for the most part, and when we can't use real, we use CGI, right? Like, Jurassic Park holds up pretty well for this same purpose, where they used a lot of puppets, especially for the close-up shots of like the T-Rex and the Velociraptors. And I think it looks a lot better in a lot of respects than Jurassic World does, which came out like 20 years later, right?
With 500 raptors.
It looks, I mean, as cool as that scene is with Chris Pratt and all the Velociraptors, it's way more scary to have like those little kids with the raptor face like right over their head in the kitchen, right? It's like there's an actual thing being there. Yeah. And I think that's sort of the lesson here of like using restraint.
But using a technology example just really quickly on like take Toy Story for whatever reason, for one thing, right? They had server farms of SGI computers, right? That would take years to render that entire movie. Like I think they worked on that movie, took 6 years to make, and it was like most of that time was just rendering, right? It's like their build, Jenkins is amazing compared to their build servers, right? You know? But what I was going to say too is, I love Rogue One, don't get me wrong. I love Rogue One. However, put Rogue One on and look at the character, the Peter Cushing character, is it Governor Tarkin?
Yep.
Right? Look at his character. Look at his face when he's talking to anybody on that screen. And then go back and watch Star Wars and look at the actual real actor, and you'll see that they got his voice down pretty good. They've got his face down pretty good. But if you look at the muscles in his face, they don't move the same. When he's like when that actor was being cynical, there were muscles in his cheek and stuff like that were, and his forehead that were moving differently. And they totally missed the boat on that in Rogue One. They have the technology to do it. I don't know why they didn't carefully study what this guy did. And this is my artist eye going, you know what? That's a near miss, Jaime. That's a near miss.
I completely agree, because I'm not opposed to the idea of the CGI Grand Moff Tarkin, but and I actually think there
or
are
even the Leia one at the end, right?
Right. At least that one was short.
Spoilers. Sorry, spoilers.
It wasn't quite as bad. I think there actually are some parts of those scenes that he's in that they just look amazing. It's just like you could show this little clip here, there's like 5 seconds to a person, and ask them, okay, what did you notice? And they'd be like, I don't know. I was like, oh, you didn't notice there actually wasn't a real person there? Yeah. The problem is they kept him in there for minutes at a time.
Yeah,
the illusion just didn't work, right? Like to your point of like the alien thing of like, well, if it's a dude in a suit and it looks terrible, don't show all of it at once, right? You show it very carefully framed and show it very, very few times, kind of like the story that people say about Jaws, where the robotic shark was going to show up more, but it kept breaking down. So they said, forget it. Let's do what we can to avoid showing the shark, and it's a much better movie for it.
Right. I was just looking him up on Peter Cushing, looking him up on
like IMDb or something
on the Google machine here, and he died in 1994. I thought he was one actor, a couple of actors. Maybe it was Alec Guinness, who died between Star Wars and Return of the Jedi. No, what was the other one called? Empire Strikes Back, right?
Well, Alec Guinness is definitively in the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
So no, but I think they filmed some of those scenes like ahead of time, or did they go back to them? I can't remember. Anyway, just stop yelling at your phone. We don't care. It's not that important. Anyway, this isn't the Star Wars podcast, we don't care. Although we're picking on them like crazy. What was I going to say about Peter Cushing? Oh, man.
So he died in 94, and we were talking about the CGI Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One.
Grand Moff Tarkin, that's his name, not General Tarkin. I had a point about that. Oh, it was so good, too. I'll have to wait till next week, I guess. Well. Yeah, no, but to your point, or to my point, they should have treated him like the alien and aliens, and because we knew who he was as soon as he was on the screen. As soon as you heard his voice, you knew who he was, right? You didn't have to be staring at him and looking at the hairs coming out of his nostrils to really believe that was Peter Cushing,
I think there are alternatives like showing him from angles that don't show the front of his face, or that plus maybe hiring an actor that does look a whole lot like him and use the CGI to get that last, few steps that look different. I think there were a lot of options beyond the audacity, having the audacity to try right now to completely replace a human. I think even though it's much further along than the Final Fantasy The Spirits Within movie that you talked about, like the Grand Moff Tarkin blows those away, right? Like those look like dead mannequins compared to him, and yet he still is in that uncanny valley of I can tell that that's not an actual person.
Yeah. Well, so I know what I was going to say about The Empire Strikes Back. I wonder, because a lot of people say them, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? And my son will say the same thing. He says Empire Strikes Back is by far his favorite movie, right? Mm-hmm. I want to find someone who's only ever seen Empire Strikes Back and not seen Star Wars, right? I have a couple of friends who at work who've never seen Star Wars, like they've never seen the 6 movies. They've only seen The Force Awakens, right? Which is kind of interesting. So it's interesting to get their perspective. It's like I want to find people who've seen Harry Potter movies but never have read the books. Have you read the books?
I've never read the books. No.
Oh, but have you seen the Harry Potter movies?
I've seen all the movies. Yes.
So do you think it's all that, or like do you think that people who read the books are space crazy or something?
No, I just have not gotten into the books. But but I think the movies are really good. And
I can tell you there were so many subplots. Like there's a whole context of subplots in those movies that don't touch. If you read the book, like for instance, I don't know if you remember, there's a scene in might be Prisoner of Azkaban, the one where Harry Potter gives Dobby a sock, right? And Dobby's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you gave me a sock! Oh my God!" He's just blown away, right? Well, there's a whole subtext of these little house elves, right? They're not allowed to have clothes, right? They're not allowed to own things, right? So when Harry Potter gives him a sock, that's a huge moment in the story, right? But again, it's like one of these, one of the things that they didn't have time for in the movie, like the very first movie. I think there's a scene where they've just gotten to school and they spent a couple of weeks at school, and then his owl flies across the front of the school, and it's like the end of the school term, right, kind of thing. Like they're like in that whole story, there was a whole thing about Hermione and all the books she like at one point. There's one of the stories, I think it's the Goblet of Fire. No, that's not. It's the one with the Hufflegriff bird or whatever that creature is called, where Hermione has that little watch where she can go back through time. Do you remember that one?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's see here. So it's the werewolf one. Was that not Azkaban? That's Azkaban. I don't remember. Yeah, it's got to be.
It might be Azkaban. It might be. It was the one with the one with the werewolves and stuff like that, I think. Right. Anyway, but remember Hagrid's in his cottage, and the inspector guy, the head inspector, I don't know, Ministry of Magic or whatever guy, is coming to take the Hufflegriff away, and Harry Potter and Hermione go and steal it. And then at one point she goes back and that's a whole story, the whole subplot about her taking 3 courses at a time. Like right. How we were just talking about 360 IDEV being 4 tracks, and how are we going to manage that? Like even though you're at the conference, you're going to miss 3/4 of the conference, right? Imagine Hermione had, and I think it was, I forget the name of the McGonagall, I think was the teacher who gave her this watch and taught her how to use it, so she could actually take 3 or 4 classes at the same time.
Right, and they hinted at briefly in the movie, but definitely not an entire subplot about it as you're specifying here.
Yeah, so all through the book, she would kind of show up, and Ron and Harry would look at her and go, "Where did you come from?" kind of thing, and she just kind of popped into the room, kind of thing, literally. But yeah, it was kind of. But again, so my point about that is that I think it's to get into your head and sort of understand what you really like about the Harry Potter movies versus someone who's read the books and gone to because there's a level of disappointment, as you can imagine, or there's a kind of different. You kind of have to tell the story differently in a movie context because you can't get that many words into a movie. You can't get that much descriptive copy into a movie.
Yeah. I think for me,
movies would be years long, right?
People think I'm crazy when I say this, but I say, look, if you have a choice, right? Like, if you were a Harry Potter fan from book 1, you really didn't have a choice. All you had was the books themselves. And it was years later that they actually started making the movies. So there's not much you can do there. But I'd say now, if you've never read the books and you've never watched the movies, I'm a fan of the philosophy of I want to start good and get to great. What does that mean? I think you watch the movies first, and then you read the book, because no matter how much something might be a cultural touchstone, or it might be a classic and an Academy Awards or anything. Like even stuff like the Godfather movies. I've never read the books. I've loved the movies. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, the books are better." It's like that's a constant refrain. The books are better. The books are better. Like I don't want to be disappointed, right? We don't eat the cupcakes first and then go have the vegetables to trail it off with, right? No, you eat your vegetables and then you have the cupcakes, right? You start good and then you get better.
Well, and then you get things like Blade Runner. Like Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies too. Like I think I even converted a Laserdisc onto DVD, so I have it on my DVD player. But but then I went and read the book, "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" Right, and it's the same, but it's different, right? Like the movie's much more sinister. Like it's got the whole sort of the replicants coming back to find their maker subplot, which isn't. I don't really remember that being in the book. The book's quite different, right? So
the difference is an adaptation for sure. Like the Hobbit book is way different than the Hobbit movie series. For many reasons.
Well, and also there's also the Rankin Bass Hobbit. I don't know if you've seen the Hobbit cartoon that was done by Rankin Bass. The famous animating company.
Yeah, the rotoscoped one. I might have seen it a long time ago. I definitely have not seen it in years. Recently.
Well, I have a copy of it on. I think I might have a copy of it on DVD, but I have a copy for sure on VHS. But
well, okay. Let me answer the other question first before I go into some Hobbit related discussion here. So for the Star Wars thing, my favorite movie of of all the Star Wars movies is The Empire Strikes Back. I think it's the best Star Wars entry. However, I think that Star Wars...
Does it stand on its own, though? Does it stand on its own as a single movie?
And that's the however. However, the better movie in general is A New Hope, right? The original 1977 Star Wars, because it is fully compact. Like, you come in, it's sort of like the middle of things going on. It's like an en media res sort of thing, but there's enough that you're given that, like, okay, I understand what's happening, and you have a very satisfying conclusion. The Empire Strikes Back has none of that. You start en media res, you have to know all of this backstory to make any sense whatsoever, these relationships, and it ends very unsatisfyingly, like with a cliffhanger. You want to know more, and it's a much more complicated movie because it benefits from a lot of those things, and that's why it's like my favorite. I'm like, wow, the tone is just spot on here, and there's a lot of classic moments. But I think I answer the question of which is the best movie, and I'm like, well, I think it's the original Star Wars is the best one. None of the other series entries stand alone, right? Even the Phantom Menace doesn't stand alone. It hints and gives you a little bit of winks and elbow nudges, like, remember this thing from the original trilogy that make no sense whatsoever if you didn't already know the lore.
Yeah.
I remember a criticism of the Lord of the Rings, particularly the Fellowship of the Ring, was like, this seems like when Obi-Wan sacrifices himself. I'm referencing, of course, when they're in the bridge and Gandalf sacrifices himself to fight the Balrog. I'm like, this book came out in the 50s, long before Star Wars was a thing, right? Forget about character archetypes. Like, that literal, inspiration was there. Obi-Wan equals Gandalf, Gandalf equals Obi-Wan in these books.
Okay. Let's take this back to context. I mentioned earlier about this whole, whether Star Wars had this whole world built around it, and I don't think it did, right? It had maybe a sort of a theory behind it, right? But authors like J.R. Tolkien and Isaac Asimov, they built an entire world before they started writing in their minds or on paper or whatever, before they started writing the stories. Like, so as J.R. Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, he kind of invented this world in which these people live, right? And he must have had, like, when he had the Ring of Power, right? What do they call it? The One Ring, right? When Bilbo gets that from Gollum, he must have in his mind's eye had a backstory about the ring, right? And where it came from and why it had this magical power and that kind of stuff. Or did he, right? Because when he sat down to write The Lord of the Rings, he had this whole sort of Game of Thrones kind of like, giant landscape, right? So,
I do wonder about that. Like, I know there is history.
You can't compare George Lucas to J.R. Tolkien, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, he basically did this whole thing because he was a linguist, right? And he created this, these languages like Elvish and everything. It's like, oh, maybe I should do something here. And the Lord of the Rings itself reads kind of like the Bible. It's very, very dense and has a lot of description in it that doesn't make any sense unless you view it as sort of like a biblical equivalent that he was creating there. And coming back to like the Hobbit piece, I kind of wonder if the reason the Hobbit sort of suffers a little bit is that they tried to make it be as epic as the Lord of the Rings. And when I've read both, sets of books, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, yes, there is some connectivity there. And I think it was really cool the way that Tolkien got that to work. But the tone is so different. Like, The Hobbit is for much younger children, right? And I don't know, like, say they're 8 to 10, maybe it reads that style. It has a lot more whimsy and magic and wonder to it. And Lord of the Rings is much more like teenager, young adult sort of thing of like, that's people are dying and this is serious. And I think,
or even adults.
If you had the Hobbit series come out, or Hobbit movie come out first, and then Lord of the Rings, it probably works a little bit better than here's this grand epic saga, and then let's take this other movie that isn't really meant to be grand epic saga and have it work, right? Like imagine if I mentioned the Balrog scene in Lord of the Rings. Imagine if the Balrog was like talking to Gandalf. It wouldn't play the same, right? Like, it's better to have it be essentially a mindless beast. And Smaug,
the Rancor, right?
What's that?
It's the Rancor,
right? And Smaug in The Hobbit speaks, and kind of entertainingly so as Benedict Cumberbatch, but it feels really weird tonally. And like, you got dragons that speak in this world that doesn't fit with a world of mindless Balrogs, right? Like, tonally, it seems very weird, and that's why I feel like, the Hobbit is more like a younger kid's story, and the deep dark stuff is in Lord of the Rings. That's much more in that high fantasy sort of setting.
Yeah, when you get around around to reading Harry Potter. I started reading Harry Potter when the Goblet of Fire had come out, but I started with the first book. The first book is written like a book for 11-year-olds, right? It's written very juvenile and very easy to, like, you'll whip through it, right? Mm-hmm. But the later books you get into are, they're much more, there's a lot more going on. There's much more, death and destruction and, havoc and whatever. And also maybe what's her name's writing
J.K.
got
Rowling?
Much better. J.K. Rowling, yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe her writing got better. Her writing style got better. But like when you do get around to reading that book, you'll see what I mean. Like it's very juvenile at first, and then the first book entirely, right? Like it's a very easy read. But as you read into the later stories, they get harder and harder to read, right? So there's more going on, right?
Yeah, I do wonder how much of that was Rowling's skill and how much of it was more like...
I think it was skill. I think it was like...
It's kind of more... I mean, the problems of... What's Harry? Like 11 at the beginning of the books?
Yeah, exactly.
And 17. Like those problems are so radically different. And so it is kind of entertaining and funny how in the same series, Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone is more like, oh no, I may fail my potions class. This sucks so bad,
Yeah.
And in the Deathly Hallows, it's like, Harry, you literally have to sacrifice and die, and people are being murdered all around you to deal with this problem. I was like, well, okay, this is totally different, but at least there's a progression there, right? You hypothetically grow up with Harry, assuming you started as a young kid reading these. As he grows up, you grow up too. So I'd be very curious to see the sort of differences between people who read the books as they were going along, and were already adults, or people who read the books as they were kids and went along, and then people who are kids and adults now who are reading through the books straight through, and kind of see, like, how do they feel about that? Does it feel weird? Did you notice the difference? Was it more obvious to you reading, being able to binge read them versus the people who had to wait like a year or two in between books?
Anyway, this is going to be impossible to edit because it's like almost like a whole show unto itself.
I'm not sure how we ended up on this.
So we should wrap up the Star Wars after show.
I'm telling you, this is, if we had, audio engineer interns, communications and broadcasting interns, it would be fantastic to do these kinds of extra shows, because I'd love to have this sort of conversation we just had, but throw in Tammy into the mix and like, let's talk about zombies here, right? We broached on the, do zombies float? Can they swim? Sure, does zombie Michael Phelps, does he swim?
Yeah.